Justice Associations. Let it be known, it is Friday, the very first day of July 2022. History at the Supreme Court. Ketanji Brown Jackson is now officially Associate Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson after her swearing in yesterday. We'll discuss that. And in Texas, you want to talk about CRT? Well, you may not believe what they are proposing now. We'll talk about that and more with James Wright of the Washington Informer. Good morning, James.
The wonderful morning. It's July the 1st, and everybody in DC who's a wage worker just got a raise.
Oh, okay. Thanks for bringing that news. Let it be known, James. Very good. James, Associate Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson officially joined a court in turmoil. Uh, so much as we've been covering on Let It Be Known has been going on with this court. What difference, if any, will Judge Jackson make?
You know, Stacy, there's a saying that every time a justice joins the Supreme Court, it changes the court in some ways. And I have no doubt that is going to be the case when when she really gets started in terms of doing work. She is persuasive. She's an excellent writer. And I believe that on a lot of cases, even though they may go 6-3, they will be more reasoned than these hackneyed reasons that have come out, opinions that have come out within the last 2 weeks. Let me just say this. It's important to understand that on many cases, the Supreme Court, those justices actually agree on things. On many of the cases, they agree. It's just these hot button issues that they don't agree. So those are the ones that definitely need to be paid attention to. Also, with right now, as of her swearing in, and this is very important, Stacey, for people to understand this, and only a James Wright would point this out. This is the first time in the history of the Supreme Court that white males are now the minority.
Okay.
Yeah, you have four white males, and you've had all white. You know this. You've had all white males throughout the overwhelming majority of the history of this country, I should say. But now you have four white males, and you have five non-white males on the court. You got a black man, Clarence Thomas.
Who's the black man? Oh, I forgot.
You got a Latino Sotomayor. You have females, Elena Kagan, Amy Comey Barrett, and of course, Ketanji Jackson. And so you have five non-white males on the Supreme Court. The white males are now the minority on that court.
Okay. And James, David Youngblood says that her influence will be realized in future writings. And you often talk about her ability to write. Why is that so important?
It's important because, that is the business and the trade, in addition to legal logic, of the court. She will have the ability to persuade her colleagues, particularly John Roberts, to look at matters a particular way. Some of us suspect that she will be a liberal justice, but on some matters, she may be a little bit more conservative than we would like that some of us may believe. Not on civil rights, Stacey, but on some other issues like intellectual property, maybe environmental, that sort of thing. But her ability to write and her ability to persuade her colleagues will make a big difference. She's not going to have a lot of influence with the Clarence Thomases, the Neil Gorsuch, or the Samuel Alitos, but she will have some influence with John Roberts, and that is key. That is key in terms of how we go forward as a country. Her ability to write, her ability to persuade, her ability to use logic thoroughly will definitely be a boon to the court.
And James, with her swearing in yesterday, is it one of those where were you when? Is it one of those moments?
Yes, I think it is. Where were you when one of those moments? I was watching it on social media. Hey, this is the 21st century. That's what we do now. And I remember thinking that will I ever see this day? 20 years ago, it really wasn't thinkable that a black woman would be on the Supreme Court. But hey, 20 years ago, it wasn't even thinkable that a black woman would be vice president. And the first woman to be vice president is a black woman. Good grief. I mean, it was still unthinkable that Miss Sears in Virginia would be the lieutenant governor of Virginia, even though she's a Republican. So things are changing. And this is just one of those moments that we will always remember when she crossed that threshold to become a U.S. Associate Supreme Court Justice.
Well, again, I'm going to allude back to David Youngblood, just to underscore you and David's point about her writing. He says that her writing will be the reasoning used to overturn these current cases, eliminating substantive due process rights we've come to expect and now apparently unconstitutional. There's a lot we've seen over the past week with this court. Of course, Roe v. Wade, the New York gun law, even the Miranda rights. We've seen this court weigh in on in the past week. Upcoming for this court is even more controversial matters. The North Carolina situation where a ruling there where the legislature is seeking Supreme Court to weigh in on whether or not they can control the state's election. Well, states control federal elections, I should say. In other words, James, it seems to be lining up with this idea that if you don't like a candidate who actually won, you can overturn the election. It's very dangerous.
That is very dangerous, and that is the nail to democracy if that takes place. It is my thinking that this court will not go it will not go far. I'm thinking if you're looking maybe at a 5-4 decision, you may be even looking at a 6-3 decision in favor of keeping democracy in North Carolina. But this isn't new because I've heard rumblings about this in Georgia and even in my home state of Texas, and of course, Arizona. They were trying to move in that direction in terms of if we don't like the results, we just won't certify. That's not the way the system was designed to work. That's not the way it's supposed to work. And I hope people in North Carolina really stand up in arms against this, because if this takes place, then the elites will be able to put people in there that they want, and they won't do anything for anybody of color, and they certainly won't do anything who's lower or middle income. So this is critical that, and I hope the NAACP gets involved in this, because even though this isn't a direct civil rights issue, this is a human rights issue in terms of being able to govern ourselves and for the people to have their elected representatives and their wishes to be fulfilled.
Well, we also know that the former president laid the groundwork for all of this, and we're seeing he and Mitch McConnell's master plan, this evil plan. We are seeing it play out, and again, we have to ask, James, where are the Democrats? Where is Chuck Schumer, the Senate? And we know we have 2 senators on there, Democratic senators who are not going along with the Democratic agenda. Where's the president? I noticed that Nina Turner, who we've had on this program before, she continues to call out, along with AOC, the president to use the bully pulpit when it comes to these Democratic senators who have gone rogue. James, where are the Democrats on this?
As I look back and think about this, Stacey, I think that this is an important civics lesson. You and I, when we were in school, we took civics. I think they've taken civics out of schools these days, like they've taken out PE. And and this is important to understand that the president is not a dictator or a pontiff. He has, or I should say, she someday has authority over the executive branch. The president does not have authority over the legislative branch. and the president really doesn't have authority over the judicial branch. This is an example of what Joe Biden is showing the American people, the limits to his power, which is a very good thing. Because if President Nixon had been allowed to continue through Watergate, we may be living under a dictatorship right now. And that's why it's,
Well, didn't we
yes,
didn't we pretty much have as close to a dictatorship in our history from 16 to 20?
I think that in recent years, yes. In recent years, yes. Even though that didn't go too far. I know there are a lot of us who are on the left who are saying, oh my gosh, these conservatives, they're ramming these things down our throats. Mitch McConnell is a dictator. He's of the Senate. He's power hungry. And according to the rules that the Senate has adopted, he's only using the rules that he adopted. Again, people have to turn out and vote and make sure that they put representatives and senators who represent the people, not the corporate interests. But people have to turn out to vote in order to do that. But get back to your original question, this is a sign of, it shows the power, but it also shows the limits of presidential power, which is a good thing. And I agree with AOC, the president, and Nina, that the president must use his bully pulpit to put a stop to this stoppage of abortions, of legalization of abortions in
Well,
terms of going back to the states.
when you think about it, the president is the leader, right? Commander in chief of the military.
Yes.
You want someone in there who is strong, who has who shows themselves to be presidential, to be strong, and not only in their walk, but in their talk. And when you have such an emergency, this make it's not been declared, but not an emergency situation with what's been going on politically in the court and elsewhere. You can't even walk the streets of New York, James, without fear that you're going to be gunned down. You can't go into a grocery store as a 60, 70, 80-year-old without fear of being gunned down. Our 4-year-olds and 8-year-olds in school can't go into schools without fear of being gunned down. We are in a state of emergency, and it's time for the powers that be, President Biden and others, to stand up and really, really show some force behind their words, and whatever actions, whatever executive orders that can be used needs to be used. This is what AOC is talking about. This is what Nina Turner is talking about. That bully pulpit, push people around. You know what? This idea, we love Barack Obama. We love romanticizing about his 8 years. He still carries a voice. It's time for Barack Obama to use that voice too. That's what we've been hearing. What do you say?
Well, we need to be very careful when we talk about strong presidencies, because the impression is that if you're loud, and this is an American thing, Stacey, that if you're loud, you're strong. That's not necessarily true. Some of our most effective presidents were people who got things done behind the scenes. I'll give you an example: Harry Truman. When Harry Truman took office in 1945 upon the death of Franklin Roosevelt, it was assumed that this was just some haberdasher from Missouri who didn't know what the heck he was doing, and he's not going to last a year in office. But he actually served one full term and closed out Roosevelt's term, and historians consider him one of the best presidents. The reason is because what he did while he was in office. Now, Harry was not one of the sexiest people in terms of the presidency, but he did what he had to do. That's the most important thing. Let me make another quick example: Abraham Lincoln. And I read a lot of books on Abraham Lincoln, and they thought Abraham Lincoln was just the disaster. Not only the Southerners, but many Northerners thought he was just going to be a disaster. But he was the man that held our country together, even though he was not, quote, quote, loud and strong. So we have to be careful in terms of saying, well, Joe Biden is a weak president because he doesn't come out and just speak out every day and bang his fist on the wall. That's not how things are done in official Washington. And
Yeah.
Stacey, you know this, official Washington, things are done quietly. And that's how you become effective, by being quiet instead of loud and obnoxious.
Yeah, well, and you make obviously great points, James. Sometimes this is what we hear from our viewers, and we have to lift them up. David Youngblood says the problem is the Senate has no rules; it has traditions, which the Republicans see no reason to follow. And he also says the Supreme Court has lost most of its credibility because they have become intensely right wing and political. Joining us now is the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Dr. Benjamin Chavis. Dr. Chavis, how are you?
Good morning, and I'm glad to be on the show. I think this is another Friday. The struggle continues. I'm so proud of the Black press. We're out now mobilizing to get 20 million more Black voters to the polls, in spite of all of the contradictions, in spite of all of the disappointments. Yesterday was a very historic day for Black America, the first Black woman being on the Supreme Court of the United States. We shouldn't lose sight of things that happen in our benefit, even though we want more. In order to get more, we have to vote more.
Well, also in the news this morning, Dr. Chavis and James Wright, this one, you know what? The Texas Education Agency is proposing to the State Board of Education, who decides state curriculum, to change the word slavery to involuntary relocation.
Oh,
The
good grief.
hearings on social studies curriculums are scheduled this summer. And right now, in the Texas social studies curriculum in elementary and middle school curriculum, there are numerous references to American quote unquote Indians. Um, Jim Crow, hello, James, Dr. Chavis.
Well, part of what we're facing is ignorance. One of the things that gives rise to pseudo ideologies, gives rise to racial hatred, racial prejudice, is based out of their ignorance. And most people are not properly educated. And what Texas wants to do now is to ensure that the students in Texas don't get the truth, don't get the accurate facts about slavery, about the transatlantic slave trade. Instead of facing the truth, they want to bury the truth and deny the truth. But the truth is always going to come out. So I think that, we've got to continue to press forward. But it's not shocking. I mean, look, this is a state that wants everybody to have guns, but it also wants everybody not to have the truth.
Yeah,
And
Bobby. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
everybody to vote. So, nothing surprised me that comes out of Texas, but we can turn Texas around. If
Mm-hmm.
Blacks and Latinos vote in record numbers in Texas, you'll get a new governor, you'll get a new senator, you'll get a new secretary of education in the state of Texas. That's what's on the ballot. Either we're voting for a future or we're voting for a backwardness.
Yeah, well, Bobby Henry says we better pay close attention to these school boards and state education departments, James.
Well, he's absolutely right. Going back to Texas, I'll definitely talk about the school boards. I got plenty to say about that. The thing about it is that when I was a kid, we had the Gablers, and the Gablers would always come to the Texas Education Agency, where my father worked, by the way, and to review the textbooks. And, many people really didn't make a big deal out of it because that's just what the Gablers did. They just, talked about the text. But it was later revealed that it was the Gablers that kept Malcolm X from being mentioned in the textbooks. And it was also mentioned that the Gablers tried to water down Martin Luther King's contributions to our country at that time. When they would go to these hearings to talk about what's in these textbooks, it looks like the Gablers, even though they have moved on, are coming back in a different form. So this idea of slavery being involuntary, I even saw a text that said that those of us who are on the transatlantic trade were workers from Africa,
Yeah,
workers from Africa. That's the
right.
most ridiculous thing I ever heard. This has got to stop, and Texans have got to get involved for the real history.
Well, David Youngblood says he remembers the Gablers, James. He's right there with you. He also says, to Dr. Chavis's point, Dr. Chavis mentions this 10 million more black voters. The hashtag is 10 million more black voters. David Youngblood says 20 million more black voters will change America's future. Do not accept a whitewashed history that does not acknowledge the colonizers' true barbarism. I can't talk because I just can't talk today, James. But go ahead, James.
Yeah, well, see, and you're talking about a whitewashing of history, and that is definitely what's going on. And what bothers me is that this is going to get worse and worse. Um, what are they going to say about the civil rights movement? You already had this talk that Brown versus the Board of Education may not have been as impactful as it should have been, and that is definitely a lie if there is one. So we need to mobilize now in terms of these school boards. I as somebody who, when I lived in Austin, was kind of involved in school board politics, this is very serious. I know here in Washington we like to think about the Congress and the president, but these board of education, these school boards, they are making decisions about curriculum that our children will learn from. For example, let's say mathematics. Now, we say mathematics is a pure subject, but think about this. What about the great ancient mathematicians that were of African descent that made great contributions to math, that where these Europeans came in to learn from them? But you got to learn that.
Yeah, well, we are seeing, and again, I'll point out, Bobby Henry, the Roe decision has opened the door to get rid of everything that the civil rights movement has done. And James mentioned, Dr. Chavis, that they will have you at some point believe the civil rights movement didn't exist. Um, we see in states continue to make it increasingly hard for certain people to vote. We're seeing states increasingly making it easy for people to get guns without licenses, without permits, without any training. In the face of the fact that we've had about almost 300 mass shootings this year alone.
Well, again, uh, the black press, we are calling out the fake news. We have to call out the fake histories, the fake politicians, the fake governors, the fake members of Congress, the fake senators. Uh, but but we have to replace these people. Yeah, I think 2022 is the payback. We have to, and we pay these people back with these terrible policies against our interests by our votes. We have an opportunity. What should be our response? It's one thing to point a finger and say, look how bad these people are. But we got to do more than point it out. We have to remove the bad people. We have to remove them from office. And we have an opportunity this November if we go and vote. And that's why we said 10 million more. When you just say 10 million votes, 10 million more than we would have voted in these primary, in not only the primary election, but the midterm elections. We got to go across the state. I'm so proud that on the front page of most of our newspapers, we have the same headline. 10 million more black voters, hashtag. And that's what we're going to be every day, 24/7. That is going to be our mantra till now in November.
And so in November, as Dr. Chavis said, that'll be the mantra till then. But let's talk about, James, what do we do right now? What can be done right now? A lot of people say they're suffering. A lot of people are suffering at the moment that we're living in at this moment. So until then, what do they do, James?
It is important for the Democratic Party, and I'll just say it because the Democratic Party is what we have right now, in order to organize and mobilize people, communities of color, but also progressive women and suburbanites, and particularly focus on the educated suburbanites, and focus on those who are educated, who understand that even though they may have economic interests or have economic aspirations to the people who really support Donald Trump, it is not in their overall best interest to support those folks because their overall agenda is not their agenda. In other words, people need to register to vote. They need to register to vote in their primaries. They need to get organized so they can go to the polls on November the 8th and take our country back.
All right, James Wright, bringing it home again. And before we close, Dr. Chavis and James, we should note that today begins the trial in Russia of Brittany Griner. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that, as well as these things are already established, probably in Russia, pre-established. Any chance of her being acquitted probably is nil. But we certainly are thinking about Brittany Griner this morning as her trial officially begins there, and she's already been detained since February, and so now we are here in July, and her trial is beginning. Dr. Chavis, any thoughts on Brittany Griner at the moment?
Well, Brittany Griner is a political prisoner. She's been held not because of criminal conduct, but because of her being an American citizen at the wrong place at the wrong time in Russia. And the Russians are seizing the opportunity. They're going to use her as a negotiating chip. That's what's going on. The trial is really a distraction. She should never have been arrested in the first place. Right. So I think we in the Black press, we have to continue to amplify our demands for the freedom of our sister Brittany.
Yeah. Bobby Henry writes that for viewers to go to the Westside Gazette website and read the last 9 weeks edition concerning the Broward County School and the whitewashing that Superintendent Cartwright is doing there. And of course, David Youngblood agrees with you on Brittany Griner, Dr. Chavis. She's a bargaining chip. And so, we're going to continue to monitor that. She certainly is a bargaining chip at a time of war. And as we stated earlier, yes, war is going on, of course, in Ukraine, but war is going on right here in America, too. We see it with the decisions the Supreme Court has made. We see it with the mass shootings and this idea of white supremacy. There is a war going on, and the Black press will continue to cover it and speak truth to power on it and bring you information that you can use, certainly on this program and through the pages of the Black press. Thanks for joining Let It Be Known. Everybody have a great and safe weekend, and we will see you next week.